Tonight.
Mr. Trump is a con man.
Bombshells on Capitol Hill from the president's former fixer, Michael Cohen.
Mr. President, any reaction to Michael Cohen of his testimony?
President Trump in Vietnam denying it all ahead of his second historic summit with the leader of nuclear-armed North Korea.
And the case of the cross hits the Supreme Court. The fate of a memorial to the great hangs in the balance.
All that and more on Faith Nation.
Well, a big day here in Washington with explosive accusations and huge implications for what comes next after Michael Cohen's testimony. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm John Jessup. We begin tonight with a public hearing heard around the world with a man who once said he would take a bullet for President Trump, now lambasting his former boss before lawmakers on Capitol Hill. The president's ex-personal attorney told Congress President Trump's desire to win would have him work with anyone.
Republicans using the venue to poke holes in Cohen's credibility before he heads to prison for lying to Congress.
Cohen's bombshell testimony stopped short of accusing the president of colluding with Russia in the 2016 election campaign.
CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy is here now with more on the shots fired on both sides. Ben?
Leaked in media outlets, Cohen called President Trump a cheat and a con man. Congressional Republicans pounced and focused their questioning on Cohen's credibility, given his conviction for lying to Congress. But the commander-in-chief's former fixer and personal lawyer maintained he will let Americans decide who is telling the truth.
I am here under oath to correct the record.
Michael Cohen's explosive testimony clearly showed intent to damage his former boss, President Trump.
I am ashamed because I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat.
The former fixer accused the commander-in-chief of criminal conduct while in office and disclosed a reimbursement check from then-President Trump Cohen claimed was for hush money payments to porn star Stormy Daniels.
He asked me to pay off an adult film star with whom he had an affair and to lie about it to his wife, which I did. And lying to the First Lady is one of my biggest regrets.
And a major accusation that the president had prior knowledge of the 2016 WikiLeaks email dump that hurt Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. Cohen stopped short connecting Trump to Russia collusion.
Questions have been raised about whether I know of direct evidence that Mr. Trump or his campaign colluded with Russia. I do not.
Republicans pointed to Cohen's own past to punch holes in his testimony. Cohen faces 3 years in prison after pleading guilty to breaking campaign finance laws and for previously lying to Congress.
First announced witness for the 116th Congress is a guy who is going to prison in 2 months for lying to Congress.
Now, President Trump fired back at his former fixer even before the testimony, declaring in a tweet from Vietnam that he's not worried about Cohen's testimony and that his former attorney is lying to reduce his prison time. Cohen said he never asked for a pardon from President Trump and would not accept one if offered. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Ben. To help us decipher all the theatrics on the Hill today, we now turn to our ever-trustworthy chief political analyst, David Brody. David, actually, I was about to step on you.
No, we wanted to talk about just the coverage, the media coverage of this Michael Cohen. You know, I mean, all three networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and of course the cable networks, they ran with it. At the same time, President Trump's over in Vietnam meeting with Kim Jong-un, and it pales in comparison in the coverage that it's getting. Is this unprecedented?
Well, let's start with this. Remember, the networks broke in for the James Comey hearing almost a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. So it's not unprecedented when it comes to Donald Trump. But we know when Hillary Clinton was doing the Benghazi hearings, they didn't break in for that. And we have to go back to Iran-Contra and before that, the Watergate hearings to really kind of get that big break-in network coverage. So it's unprecedented overall, but when it comes to Donald Trump, boy, James Comey, Michael Cohen, shockingly, the networks go in for those two guys. I mean, I'm saying that rhetorically and kind of a bit sarcastically because, yeah, it was kind of not strange to see.
Well, I was chomping at the bit. Now I can ask you, Republicans today attacked Michael Cohen's credibility right outside the gate, which even some legal analysts say is a challenge for him, and it's a huge problem that undermines his credibility. So how much of this testimony should Americans believe?
Well, I think that's the big question. You know, he's a convicted liar. Don't ask me. Just talk to the courts and the federal attorneys and all of that. He is a convicted liar in front of Congress. So Americans are going to have to decide what's true and what's not. Now, the Democrats are going to say, well, most of this is true, except for maybe the part where he talked about collusion and that there's no collusion with Russia. So it just depends. Look, this reminds me of the boy who cried wolf, you know, the children's fairy tale, where the boy that cried wolf basically kept lying and lying and lying, and then finally says, no, really, I'm telling the truth, and no one believes him because, you know, he doesn't have that credibility. So, you know, I think the credibility is obviously a major problem for Michael Cohen. He was even caught in a lie today. He said that he never wanted to join the White House and be the chief of staff or any of that, but it turns out that's not true at all. I mean, there are sources after source saying he wanted that chief of staff job. As a matter of fact, CNN was fact-checking him, and if CNN is calling you out on lies, you're not having a good day.
Yeah, Jim Jordan going after him hard on that one. David, Cohen, he called Trump a racist, a con man, and a cheat, bringing copies of these apparent checks that he claims were repayment for paying off porn star Stormy Daniels. How much of a problem is this whole issue for the White House and President Trump?
Well, I think there's two issues. For the president personally, it's embarrassing. At the same time, we've known this before. The Stormy Daniels stuff, the checks. I don't think we've known too much about those checks written when he was president of the United States. I think there were about 11 of them that we heard about today. But look, that's more of a personal nature. Maybe it's legal. We'll have to wait and find out. But there is a yawn factor to some of this, I mean, to a degree, because we know President Trump, this just in, is not a Boy Scout. We know this. Voters voted for him anyhow, regardless of all of this. And when Michael Cohen says that Donald Trump's a racist and a con man and a cheat, he's basically indicting all the people that voted for Donald Trump, basically saying, you know what, you are all played for suckers, excuse the expression, but that's what they say in the streets of New York at least, and I'm not sure voters are going to buy that. I think voters are proud of their vote, and they're not going to put up with Michael Cohen saying that.
David, we have less than a minute left, but I have to ask you, you know Michael Cohen professionally from your time reporting with him. How much different was this Michael Cohen who took the stand today from the brass knuckles Michael Cohen of years past?
Well, he was more humble, but you could see a little bit of the feistiness that he wanted to get out. He was trying to control himself. He's brass knuckles. He is the fixer. I've known him for 8 years, probably dozens and dozens of emails throughout those times. I want to read you one that he sent me. This was a quote about Donald Trump when I was asking him about his character, and this is what he said, quote, I believe that Donald Trump might possibly be mentally and emotionally the strongest human being I've ever met. The level of hatred by detractors, media pundits, and others would totally overwhelm and cripple others, not him. His convictions are so steadfast and purposeful that he dismisses the negativity so that he can create positive results for all Americans and deliver on his mantra to make America great again. And so, look, this is Michael Cohen in an email to me on August 28, 2000.
It's a ringing endorsement.
Yeah, in 2017. This was not 8 years ago. This was just recently, and now he's singing a different tune because he's going to prison, and that's part of it.
And we have to leave it right there. Chief Political Analyst David Brody, thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, David. Well, halfway around the world, a whole different story. The ripples of Cohen's testimony are distracting from a historic and potentially consequential meeting in Vietnam. In just a few hours, President Trump and his North Korean counterpart will begin formal negotiations in Hanoi. Trump wants Kim to dismantle his nuclear sites in a verifiable way. Kim, meanwhile, is seeking relief from crushing U.S. sanctions that are hobbling his economy. The summit kicked off with handshakes and smiles.
It's an honor to be with Chairman Kim. I thought the first summit was a great success, and I think this one hopefully will be equal or greater than the first.
Followed by dinner.
Our relationship is a very special relationship.
All of it leading up to negotiations between the two countries with a long history of hostilities. President Trump emphasizing what could be for North Korea and pointing to the success of host country Vietnam, another communist country with one of the world's fastest growing economies.
Vietnam is thriving.
But U.S. intelligence officials say it's unlikely North Korea will give up its nukes. And while the world watches on, it's not clear if Kim is even interested in giving up his control to allow outside investments. And President Trump has said there's no rush to see North Korea completely denuclearized. He is willing to let the process play out as long as North Korea continues to hold off on nuclear and missile testing.
Well, for more on the president's second historic summit with the North Korean leader, we now turn to Guy Taylor, the Washington Times chief foreign correspondent. Guy, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Sure.
Well, what's the latest there in Hanoi?
Well, look, things have really kicked off here now with President Trump and Kim Jong-un and their respective teams gathering for a working dinner at the Sofitel, very fancy hotel here in Hanoi on Wednesday. This is the first real moment in this much anticipated summit, and things have so far gone smoothly, setting the stage for day 2 here tomorrow. Importantly, President Trump, in a public statement when he first met with Kim Jong-un today, the president really softened his tone. He stayed as unspecific as possible, and he did not utter the words nuclear or weapons when in Kim Jong-un's presence, sticking really only to praising the North Korean dictator. Kim Jong-un, for his part, praised President Trump specifically for pushing through criticism and sticking with North Korea in this push for a second summit. At the same time, Kim Jong-un really specifically called for patience. He said, you know, this process is going to require a lot of patience, and if you stick with me, I'll do my best to make it happen. Kim Jong-un also did not mention nuclear weapons or denuclearization, but he seemed to be alluding to that because everybody knows that's the American goal here.
Well, given the softened tone from President Trump and the talk of peace and patience from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, do you suspect or anticipate anything concrete coming from these talks?
Well, it depends what you mean by concrete. Okay, so the most likely big outcome at this point looks like a peace declaration between the two sides. This is going to draw critics who say it's a slippery slope toward the eventual removal of U.S. troops from South Korea. At the same time, it will be praised as a pretty big development because it could lead to a formal peace treaty between North and South Korea. I think the second thing that looks like is going to come out at this point is some kind of an agreement on an expanded diplomatic presence of the North Koreans inside the United States, something like a liaison office. So this is the term being used, and also possibly a embassy-like liaison office for the United States in Pyongyang. The third thing is that it's very likely is that North Korea will agree to turn over more remains of U.S. soldiers who died in the Korean War more than a half century ago. But when it comes to the specific issue of North Korea's nuclear weapons, I think it's going to be a big surprise if we see anything very specific or concrete on the nuclear issue over the next 2 days.
We'll have to wait and see about that. But what about a formal end to the Korean War, at least setting the stage to formally ending the war?
Yeah, this is something that North Korea has indicated that it wants. You know, the problem for the United States is that if there is no stalemate or ongoing friction on the peninsula, then it becomes difficult for the United States to justify having such a large military footprint there right on the edge of China. At the same time, the idea of a peace declaration while North Korea still has a potentially expanding nuclear weapons program seems to run in the face of the whole U.S. mantra of verifiable denuclearization first. But again, though, in order for this process to move forward and get past where it has stalled in repeated attempts at diplomacy over the past 30 years, basically, there has to be a starting point. And here we are at this second historic summit, and this peace declaration seems like it's a true starting point for that.
Well, we know the formal summit begins tomorrow. I think I'd be remiss not to ask you, since you're there in Hanoi, can you set the stage or set the scene for us? What's the energy like there in Hanoi?
Well, in the areas downtown where President Trump and Kim Jong-un are making their movements, the best word that I could describe would be electric. Huge crowds gather on the streets whenever a motorcade carrying President Trump or Kim Jong-un is going anywhere. The security situation is very tight, but not extremely tense. It is just a lot of police presence. And the government here is basically shutting down traffic anytime there's a movement of either Kim Jong-un or President Trump. Huge crowds. President Trump mentioned that in a tweet at some point today, that, the crowds here are so big, and he wasn't lying. Throngs, thousands of people gathering outside the Sofitel Hotel this evening to try to get a glimpse of really two men that are the most talked about in the world at this point.
Guy Taylor with Washington Times, we appreciate your insight and your reporting.
Thanks so much for having me.
The fate of a 40-foot memorial to the Great War hangs in the balance. Up next, what the nation's highest court says about the World War I Peace Cross in Maryland, whether it stays or goes, and how that could affect memorials across the country.
Welcome back. The United Methodist Church is bracing for a possible mass exodus after a divisive vote on gay clergy and same-sex marriage. In St. Louis, at a special meeting this week, UMC delegates rejected the idea of ordaining LGBTQ pastors to lead their churches. Instead, they affirmed the current stance, voting to adopt a traditional plan. It reinforces both the church's ban and punishment for allowing gay marriage and practicing homosexuals in the ministry. A coalition of overseas and American-based conservative churches pushed through the vote 53 to 47%. The emotional debate upset LGBTQ supporters attending the meeting, who described the result as devastating, bigoted, and sinful. At 12.5 million worldwide members, the United Methodist Church is the second largest Protestant denomination in the United States.
Well, the Supreme Court is signaling its decision on the fate of a 40-foot cross and whether that will hold sweeping implications on memorials throughout the country.
CBN News senior Washington correspondent Paul Strand attended today's hearing on the World War I memorial in Maryland. Paul?
How you doing, John? Well, it's interesting. You're not sure what the court was signaling today, because I interviewed folks on both sides and listened to everybody as they came out of the court, and they were saying this. Both sides were saying, wow, they gave us a lot of respect. We're going to win this. But one thing, those defenders of the cross, they were asking for something really big, not just a decision on this one cross. They wanted the court to get rid of its old sort of standards, which is like, is the government too entangled with religion? Does whatever it's backing have a major secular purpose? They want this standard, coercion. Is government with this thing forcing people to accept religion? Kelly Shackelford is on the legal team, and he told me that basically they want to go back to the standard of the Founding Fathers.
It wasn't to sort of engage in some sort of religious cleansing of religious monuments across our country. The founders would be appalled at that concept. It was they didn't want there to be an established national church, and they didn't want the government coercing people with regard to their religion. And so that's what we're advocating. Passive displays like a memorial to veterans that's in the shape of a cross doesn't coerce anybody in any way.
Paul, how will this decision affect other memorials all over the country?
Well, this will be interesting because, like I said, if the cross defenders got their way, then these challenges would just almost drop off altogether. But the other side, they're saying that this is showing real harm. In fact, they were even saying a lot of Christians are joining them because basically the way that the government ends up defending these things is to secularize the object. In other words, they're saying that this cross isn't really like about, Christianity, that it's basically to memorialize those who died. It's like a grave marker in a World War I battlefield cemetery. And the atheists are saying that basically denigrates the cross itself, but if they have their way, they're all going to go away. So here's what two of the folks who originally did this case had to say to me.
This is predominantly a religious symbol. In fact, this is a memorial to Christianity.
We humanists have always said that when you mix church and state, what you do is damaging both.
Paul, what are court observers going to be looking for now as the court comes closer to the definitive ruling?
Well, what's interesting now you just basically don't hear anything for probably months till the court makes a decision. But what they're going to be, the folks at least on the side of the cross are going to be hoping is that the court is saying, can we clear up these jurisdiction of the past? Because in the past, the cases have been all over the map. Like on the same day, they said that Texas State Capitol, you can have a 10 Commandments display. Then they said to a Kentucky courthouse, no, you can't. So they hope that will all be ended and that maybe a new standard will come along, this coercion standard.
Yeah. Paul, about a minute left, but what's your sense? They're going to vote on this in June. if I believe that's right. And what direction do you think they'll take this?
Well, my feeling, just personally having seen these cases over the many years, is that they're going to say, and especially with, by the way, Chief Justice Roberts seems to not want to make big, huge, sweeping decisions. So my feeling is that they might say the cross, that can stay, but that's just because of blank, blank, and blank. They'll come up with some reasons why it should only be for this situation. And we're going to have to wait for other cases to pop up to see if they'll ever make a big, broad decision that will clear up all the mess that's there right now.
All right. Senior Washington correspondent Paul Strand. Thanks so much, Paul.
Sure.
Well, as the turmoil in Venezuela reaches new heights and the U.S. applies more pressure, we'll show you how one U.S. senator is attempting to make a difference. Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro not only refuses to budge, he's also blocking international relief aid from entering the country. Florida Senator Marco Rubio flew to neighboring Colombia to put pressure on the Venezuelan strongman. Here's CBN contributing correspondent Chuck Holton.
As the tragedy that is Venezuela reaches new levels of misery, nobody's quite sure who's in charge of the country. 50 nations now recognize Juan Guaido as the interim president, but one person in particular strongly disagrees. That's Nicolas Maduro, the man who's been running the country since 2013. But with more than 3 million Venezuelans having fled their homeland, and many of those left inside literally starving, here in the border town of Cúcuta, Colombia, tensions along the border are coming to a head. American military aircraft have been arriving here over the past week, delivering tons of humanitarian aid intended to ease the suffering of these Venezuelans. But troops loyal to Nicolas Maduro have so far blocked the shipments from entering their country. Maduro has called the shipments unnecessary and a political stunt, but these Venezuelans beg to differ.
We need help right now. You know, our people are there, starving, dying, just waiting for what? They can't waste any more time. We need help right away. Please help American people. We need you. We need you. We beg your help.
Over the weekend, a congressional delegation from the U.S. arrived at the border to see the situation, accompanied by the Colombian ambassador to the United States, Francisco Santos Calderon.
Even though the dictator is saying that this is a provocation, the only answer that we have for him is that this is an act of love. This is an act of Christianity. This is an act that shows the moral compass of those who cannot stand by seeing the suffering of millions and millions of Venezuelans that come across this bridge dying of hunger, dying because of lack of medicine.
Senator Marco Rubio from Florida was also in attendance.
What is happening here today, what is happening in Venezuela is a man-made crisis of epic proportions. Not caused by a natural disaster, but by a man-made one. A criminal regime that is willing to starve and kill its own people before it gives up power.
But many of those attending Sunday worship services across this city are clinging to hope for change in Venezuela and praying for peace in the process. In Cúcuta, Colombia, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
And today on the CBN News Daily Rundown, Chuck shares more about his experience in Venezuela, giving some background on the crisis there and sharing some of the desperate measures he is seeing people take just to survive.
You know, what's going on down there is just heartbreaking. Definitely something we need to all be lifting up in prayer.
Yeah, humanitarian crisis, thank goodness.
Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.